There are moments in music history that feel like they will never fade, moments where a voice becomes more than sound, it becomes memory itself, something people carry quietly through their lives. Some artists don't just exist in an era, they seem to belong to time in a deeper way, almost untouched by it. And then, without warning, even the most familiar presence begins to feel slightly different, like a distant change in the air that no one can fully explain but everyone somehow senses. That is what happened when the conversation around Dolly Parton slowly began to shift. It didn't arrive with noise or drama. There was no sudden announcement that shook the world. Instead, it came quietly, in small emotional moments that felt almost too soft to notice at first. A pause that lingered a little longer than usual. A reflection in her voice when she spoke about time. A gentle weight behind familiar warmth as if something deeper was resting underneath her words. People started listening differently, not because they wanted to believe something was wrong, but because they could feel something had changed in the tone. And when a voice like Dolly Parton speaks, even the smallest silence between words begins to matter. At 80, the idea of a farewell was never something fans were ready to face. Not because they ignore reality, but because some figures feel larger than the passing of years. They feel like they belong to a space where endings are difficult to imagine, where presence itself becomes part of culture, part of identity, part of emotional memory shared across generations. Then came a moment that quietly stopped attention in its tracks, a message that felt emotional in tone. Carefully chosen words that didn't declare an ending, but also didn't feel entirely like the past either. There was no dramatic goodbye, no clear conclusion, only something softer, something that felt like standing at the edge of a chapter that may or may not be closing. And that is where uncertainty quietly begins to grow. Because what does goodbye really mean when it comes from someone who has never truly left the hearts of millions, even for a moment? Is it the end of a career, or simply a more personal phase of life, one that belongs away from the spotlight, away from noise, closer to reflection and stillness? No one received a clear answer. Only a feeling remained behind, and sometimes feelings are what stay the longest. Dolly Parton has never been just a singer. She has always felt like a presence woven into everyday life, like a familiar light that quietly exists in the background of countless memories. A voice playing during long drives on open roads. A song that fills a quiet kitchen in the morning. A smile that feels instantly recognizable even to those who have never met her in person. Over decades, she built something rare, something that went far beyond fame. She built emotional trust. People didn't only listen to her music, they connected with her as if she understood something deeply human, something unspoken about joy, struggle, love, and survival. Through changing decades, shifting trends, and an industry that constantly reinvents itself, she remained steady in spirit. Not unchanged, but consistent in something deeper than style. Kindness, humor, and warmth were never performed as roles. They felt like they belonged to her naturally, like the simplest way she knew how to exist in the world. That is why even the smallest change in her tone or presence carries such weight. Because people are not only hearing a voice, they are feeling a long relationship built over time, one that stretches across generations. As she entered her later years, conversations around legacy naturally became more visible, not in a dark or heavy way, but in a reflective human way. Interviews began to carry softer energy. Stories from the past felt more meaningful, as if they were being held with greater awareness. She spoke more often about gratitude, memory, and the passing of time, not as something frightening, but as something real and unavoidable. According to reports and public appearances, there has been no confirmed moment that marks any final farewell or definitive ending. No official statement has drawn a clear line under her career or life in the public eye. But what has changed is the emotional tone surrounding her recent words, and that tone is what people respond to most deeply. Because when someone like Dolly speaks, even silence feels like it has meaning. Her legacy is not built only on awards or records, it is built on connection. On the way her songs have moved through families, passed from one generation to another, carrying the same emotional weight in different times. Her presence has become part of cultural memory itself, something that feels larger than one lifetime. So when words like farewell or goodbye appear, even softly, they are not received as simple statements. They are felt more deeply, like emotional signals rather than literal conclusions. And that is where this feeling begins to grow. Not from an ending that has been confirmed, but from the emotional space that surrounds the idea of change. For most of her life, Dolly Parton lived within a rhythm that felt unbroken. Music was not something she visited from time to time, it was something that shaped her daily existence. From early life in Tennessee to global stages filled with light and sound, she created a career that always felt both massive and deeply personal at the same time. There was movement, constant movement, but never a sense of chaos. Even at the peak of fame, she carried herself with a balance that felt rare in such a demanding world. She could stand in front of thousands in a stadium and then speak in a quiet interview with the same natural warmth, as if nothing about her essence had to shift depending on the setting. That consistency slowly became part of what people trusted most about her. Her songs told stories that felt simple on the surface, but carried deeper emotional truth underneath. Love, loss, hope, struggle, resilience, joy, these were not abstract themes in her music. They were lived experiences translated into melody. People did not need explanation to understand her songs. They already recognized the feelings inside them. Over time, that understanding became something more than admiration. It became trust, and trust like that does not disappear easily. In later years, her public life appeared calmer, not in a way that suggested absence, but in a way that suggested balance. She continued to appear in selected projects, interviews, and performances, always with the same warmth that defined her earlier years. Yet time, as it always does, began to show itself in subtle ways that only become clear when looked at in hindsight. Slower pauses in conversation, more reflective answers. A gentle shift toward talking about legacy, gratitude, and meaning. Nothing dramatic, nothing final, just natural human change unfolding quietly. Still, stability remained. And for many people, that stability felt permanent, like something that would always continue in the same form. But stability has a quiet truth within it. It can create the illusion that nothing will change, until life gently proves otherwise. The first noticeable shift was not something announced or confirmed, it was something felt. People who followed her closely began to notice a slightly different emotional texture in her recent appearances. Not sadness, not withdrawal, but something softer and more layered, as if her relationship with time itself had deepened. When she spoke about the past, it no longer felt like storytelling alone. It felt more like reflection, as if memories were sitting closer to the present than before. There was care in her voice and a quiet awareness that every word carried emotional weight. According to interviews and public moments, she had been speaking more openly about aging, legacy, and life's natural progression. This is not unusual for someone at her stage of life, but what stood out was the emotional tone behind it, something thoughtful, something almost preparatory in spirit. Not preparation for an event, but preparation of perspective. Fans began noticing small details that felt meaningful when placed together. A slightly longer pause before responding. A softer expression after laughter, a moment of stillness that followed emotional answers. Individually, none of it was significant. Together, it began to form a feeling that people could not easily ignore. And when feeling takes over, interpretation begins to grow. A message surfaced that carried emotional depth. Not a clear farewell, not a defined conclusion, but something poetic and reflective that made people pause. It didn't state an ending, but it carried the kind of tone that makes people wonder if a chapter is quietly shifting. And uncertainty always invites imagination. As time moved forward, discussions around her words continued to expand. There was no official confirmation of retirement from life or career. No verified statement indicating a final departure from public presence. Yet public interpretation began to drift anyway, shaped more by emotion than by facts. This is the nature of cultural icons. Their words rarely stay within literal meaning. They expand into emotion, memory, and personal interpretation. Dolly continued to appear in selected public moments, but even those appearances began to feel different to audiences. Not weaker, not diminished, but more reflective. As if every appearance now carried multiple layers of meaning at once. One layer belonged to the present moment, another belonged to memory, and another seemed to belong to something deeper that only time would fully reveal. People began revisiting her older interviews and songs. Music that once felt bright and simple began to feel nostalgic in new ways, not because the songs changed, but because the listener had changed. Time reshapes meaning without touching the original work. This is how emotional tension builds quietly, not through events, but through perception. And Dolly Parton, as always, stands at the center of that perception, still present, still active in spirit, still connected to her audience in ways that remain deeply human. but now seen through a different lens, one shaped by time, reflection, and awareness of change. At 80, she exists in a space that is difficult to define. Not the beginning of something new, and not a clearly marked ending. More like a phase where meaning becomes more important than movement, where presence itself carries more weight than activity. Her voice still feels familiar, her warmth still feels real. But now every moment is observed with a deeper sense of reflection, as if people are trying to hold on to something they already know is precious. And that is what makes this moment feel emotionally complex, because it is not about disappearance, it is about awareness. According to reports and public interpretation, there is still no confirmed final farewell, no official conclusion to her journey in the public eye. What exists instead is a gradual emotional shift in how people experience her presence, how they interpret her words, how they respond to her tone. Some see it as a natural part of life. Others feel it as the closing of a long and meaningful chapter. Both understandings exist at the same time without contradiction, because figures like Dolly Parton do not leave suddenly. They slowly transform into memory while still being present, and that transformation is already deeply underway in the hearts of millions. Which is why even a small change in tone can feel powerful enough to spark reflection across the world, not because something has ended, but because something has already become timeless. There are few artists whose presence feels larger than their career, and Dolly Parton is one of them. Her story is not defined by a single announcement or moment, but by decades of emotional connection, by songs that became part of people's lives, and by a voice that has carried comfort through countless seasons of change. And now, as people reflect on her words, her tone, and the quiet emotional shifts surrounding her presence, the real conversation is not about goodbye at all. It is about time. About how we understand those who have been part of our lives for so long that they begin to feel permanent, even though everything in life continues to move forward. There is no confirmed ending. No final chapter written. Only reflection, interpretation, and emotion filling the space between certainty and uncertainty. And maybe that is why this moment feels so powerful. Because it reminds us that even the brightest voices do not truly disappear. They simply change form inside us, becoming memory, becoming meaning, becoming something that stays.